Riven, if that look on your face gets any gloomier, we'll need a flashlight just to see those beady eyes of yours, grumbled Terk, flicking the switch on his worn-out plasma cutter. The cutter sputtered before letting out a feeble glow, much like Terk himself after one too many shots of station-brewed rotgut. Riven Malgar, leader of this merry band of relic hunters, shot a look back that could melt steel beams or at least make you wish they had. We're on Bastion-12. Terk, the only light in this place, is the kind that makes you wonder if radiation sickness might be the better option. The orbital megaprison was a delight, if you were a masochist with a penchant for watching misery fester in zero-G. Built like a rusted spider's web wrapped around a desolate asteroid, Bastion-12 hadn't seen a paint job since humans first figured out how to make beer from recycled urine. Their meeting with Warden Xyler Vax promised to be about as pleasant as a tooth extraction in zero-G with a rusty spanner. Riven was already counting the seconds until it was over. Each tick a reminder of why he'd rather be wrestling a feral Thuvian muckbeast naked than dealing with this bureaucratic nonsense. The corridor to Vax's office was narrow, dimly lit, and smelled like something had died in the air vents. Probably had. The kind of place that made you question every decision that led you there, like ordering seafood on a desert planet. I hear Vax's got a face only his mother could love. If she was blind and owed him money, Terk added, trying to keep the mood light. Riven snorted, his version of a laugh, which said more about his sense of humor than any punchline ever could. He's a Yathara sympathizer, Riven muttered. Probably cuddles plush toys of them while humming their anthem. The Yathara, the lovely neighbors who'd recently decided to weaponize empathy. Because what better way to conquer a galaxy than making your enemies care too much about your well-being to blow you up? Rumor had it, they were planning to turn Bastion-12 inmates into a sob story, powerful enough to melt the heart of a black hole. You think the artifact's real this time? Asked Sierra, the third member of their crew. She was the brains, or so she liked to remind them whenever something exploded unexpectedly, usually her doing. I think, Riven paused, eyeing a particularly grimy section of wall that might have once been part of a mural, now just a depressing smear, that if it isn't, we'll just have to make a dramatic exit and steal a plasma cruiser. Again, they reached Vax's office, its door a menacing slab of metal with more dents than a scrapyard in hurricane season. Terk gave it a nudge, and it creaked open with the enthusiasm of a condemned man marching towards the gallows. Warden Xyler Vax sat behind a desk that looked like it had been assembled from every bad decision he'd ever made. His face was a patchwork of scars and stubble, and he looked like he'd just crawled out of a blender set to liquefy. Ah, the Malgar Brigade, he sneered, voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for telemarketers and tax collectors. Come to grovel for my favor, I suppose. Favor's a strong word, Riven replied, settling into a chair that screamed under his weight. Think of it more as us giving you an opportunity to do something useful for once. Vax's smile was pure venom, the kind that usually preceded an unexpected knife in the kidney. And why, pray tell, should I let you rummage through my prison's depths like rats in a dumpster? Because, Sierra chimed in, twirling a strand of hair like it was a weapon of mass destruction. If there's an artifact down there and the Yathara get it first, you'll be out of a job. Or worse, you'll be their new poster boy for Intergalactic Idiot of the Year. That seemed to give Vax pause. Or maybe he was just trying to puzzle out how to keep them from taking his chair when he wasn't looking. Fine, he grumbled, rubbing his temples like Riven's presence had given him a migraine. You get one chance. But you'd better deliver something shiny, or I'll make sure you spend the rest of your days as the station's official sewage divers. Wouldn't dream of letting you down, Riven said, standing up and offering Vax a mock salute that was more insult than respect. I'd sooner eat a Yathara banquet. With that, they were ushered out, Vax's glare a palpable weight between their shoulder blades as they left. The door slammed shut behind them with a finality that suggested it wouldn't open again without a liberal application of explosives. Well, Terk grinned, that went better than expected. No one died, no one threatened to skin us alive. I'm counting it as a win. You have a strange concept of victory, Sierra muttered, adjusting her gear. Let's get moving before Vax changes his mind or remembers he left the oven on. They made their way deeper into the bowels of Bastion-12, each step filled with the kind of foreboding that only a prison with failing life support systems could offer. The corridors twisted and turned, each corner revealing an even grimmer sight than the last. Walls stained with the mistakes of the past, floors that seemed to move underfoot with an unsettling squish. You think the rumors are true. About the Yathara weapon, Terk asked, voice lower, the levity in his tone replaced by genuine curiosity. I think, Riven said, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of trouble, that if they are, we'll probably be the first to know, right before they make us their next sob story. Sierra snorted. With any luck, they'll leave me out of it. I've got a reputation to maintain as a heartless genius. Riven chuckled softly, a rare break from his usual scowl. And what a reputation it is. Now let's find this artifact before we end up as the latest exhibit in the Yathara's humans aren't that bad campaign. They descended further, the temperature dropping as they went. The air was stale. Each breath a reminder of just how much the universe hated them and their pitiful existence. Riven, you know what I hate about these jobs? Sierra asked, her tone conversational but laced with a sharp edge. That they never go according to plan. Riven replied, stepping over what he hoped was just an exceptionally ugly rock. No, Sierra said, shaking her head, that they make me give a damn. Riven paused, looking back at her. And why's that such a bad thing? Because, she sighed, caring means liability. Liability means risk, and risk means death. Terk finished, his grin broad. Or worse, paperwork. Exactly, Sierra nodded. And I loathe paperwork. They pressed on, the promise of the artifact drawing them forward like a carrot on a stick, or in their case, a nuclear warhead instead of a carrot. You know, Riven mused, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a shroud. If this thing isn't real, I'll personally hunt down whoever started the rumor and make them listen to Terk's theoretical physics lectures. Terk scoffed. Hey, I'll have you know my lectures are legendary. Infamous, more like, Sierra countered, her laughter echoing off the walls. Finally, they reached the entrance to the lower levels, a rusted hatch that looked like it hadn't been opened since the dawn of time. Riven unspooled a length of cord from his belt, ready to pry it open. Last chance to turn back, he said, though they all knew it was a joke. None of them would walk away now. Not with the promise of glory or infamy, so tantalizingly close. The hatch groaned open, revealing a shaft descending into darkness. The only thing between them and whatever lay at the bottom was a rickety ladder that promised a quick trip to hell if it gave out. Gentleman and lady, Riven said, gesturing with a mock flourish, after you. Terk clambered over the edge, grinning like a fool. See you at the bottom, he said, disappearing into the abyss. Sierra followed, shooting Riven a wry smile. Don't take too long, she said, or we'll have all the fun without you. Riven watched them go, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He could almost feel the weight of the station pressing down on him. The shadows whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. As he grabbed the ladder, the station's lights flickered, casting everything in a sickly glow. A sign, perhaps, that things were about to get interesting. Here we go, he muttered, beginning his descent into the unknown, where danger, treasure, and perhaps a touch of madness awaited. Either way, they'd make history or die trying. Maybe both. After all, that's just the kind of luck they had. Somewhere above, he thought he heard laughter. But whether it was Terk, Sierra, or the universe itself, he couldn't be sure. All he knew was that he'd find out soon enough. And with any luck, they'd all live to regret it. But then again, in a universe like this, what's life without a little regret? The ladder creaked in protest with each descending step. Like it had a union and they were violating its rights. Riven couldn't help but imagine it snapping under his weight, sending him plummeting into the depths of Bastion-12 like some kind of cosmic joke. It wouldn't be the first time the universe had a chuckle at his expense. As he descended, the walls around him closed in, the air thick with a cocktail of mildew and despair, Bastion's signature scent. He caught up to Terk and Sierra on a precarious ledge, the kind of place that screamed bad decision louder than Terk's last attempt at karaoke. Cozy, Riven remarked, stepping onto the ledge. Reminds me of that vacation spot we hit on Althura 9. Yeah, the one with the flesh-eating bacteria and free breakfast, Terk quipped, his grin as wide as the chasm before them. At least the breakfast was decent, Sierra added, adjusting her gear with surgical precision. I could go for a space muffin right now. Focus, you too, Riven said, scanning the gloom ahead. We're not here for a brunch tour. Ahead, the corridor expanded into a sprawling chamber that looked like it had been designed by someone with a grudge against architecture. Pillars rose haphazardly, and shadows clung to every surface like they were plotting something nefarious. Looks like a good place for an ambush, Terk noted, unsheathing his plasma cutter. It emitted a weak glow, more flashlight than weapon, but at least it gave the illusion of preparedness. They ventured further in, the tension hanging over them like a guillotine. The walls echoed with distant machinery, a reminder that Bastion-12 was as much a tomb as it was a prison. Anyone else get the feeling we're not alone? Sierra asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Giant space rats, Terk suggested, his eyes darting around. More like overgrown cockroaches, Riven replied, nodding to the shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally. As if on cue, a group of figures emerged from the darkness, pieced together from scraps of armor and menace. They looked like they'd been through hell and were keen on dragging someone else back with them. Great, Riven muttered. Just what I needed, more locals. The leader of the group, a wiry man with scars that told 1,000 stories, stepped forward. Malgar, he said, the name a sneer on his tongue. What brings you to our humble abode? Is this the part where I say I come in peace and you all laugh? Riven replied, his tone dry enough to start a fire. The man chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding underfoot. Depends, we might skip straight to the part where we shoot you. Charming, Sierra said, unimpressed. But we're here for something specific. We're not looking for trouble. Trouble's looking for you, the man retorted. The Yathara's got everyone on edge. Word is they want whatever's down here bad enough to pay for it in blood. Lucky us, Terk said, shifting his grip on the plasma cutter. We've got plenty to spare. Riven eyed the leader, weighing options like a butcher at a cattle market. How about a trade? You let us pass, and we'll cut you in on whatever we find. Fair. The leader's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into his features like a permanent tattoo. What's to stop us from just taking it? Call it professional courtesy, Riven said, a dangerous smile playing at his lips. Or maybe we'll just make a bigger mess than you're willing to clean up. The leader considered this, his gang shifting restlessly behind him like wolves smelling fresh meat but wary of the trap. Finally, he nodded. Fine, but you screw us and Bastion's the least of your worries. Understood, Riven replied, gesturing for his team to move. As they passed, Terk leaned in. See, told you it'd work out. For now, Riven murmured, keeping his eye on the gang until they faded into the shadows. The corridors beyond were a twisted labyrinth of rusted metal and oppressive silence, each step a reminder that they were miles from salvation and one wrong turn from oblivion. So, Sierra said, her voice cutting through the quiet, what's the plan if the Ithara do show up? Run, Terk answered, not missing a beat. Like hell, Riven said, not unless there's no other option. We need to figure out what they are after. If this weapon is real, we're screwed 6 ways to Sunday. Let's hope we can keep our pants on until then, Terk joked, though the tension in his voice was palpable. They came to a massive door, its surface emblazoned with symbols that looked as inviting as a snake's smile. A quick glance told Riven it was locked tight, probably since the last time the universe was in fashion. Think you can get us in? Riven asked Sierra, who was already knee-deep in her toolkit. PFFT, child's play, she said, rolling her eyes. I've hacked more sophisticated tech in my sleep. Yeah, but that's cause you snore like a banshee, Terk muttered, earning a smirk from Riven. As Sierra worked, Riven pondered the Ithara threat. Word on the cosmic street was that their empathy weapon was wreaking havoc on allied planets, turning hardened soldiers into sobbing messes and causing riots in places that hadn't seen conflict in decades. Kind of ironic, ain't it? Terk said, reading Riven's thoughts. Weaponizing kindness to conquer the galaxy. Yeah, Riven agreed, a grim smile tugging at his lips, like getting knifed by a hug. Sierra snorted, finally getting the door to yield with a satisfying hiss. We're in. Beyond, the room stretched out like a mausoleum. Rows of ancient devices lay dormant, each one a relic from a time when hope might have been more than a punchline. There it is, Riven said, spotting a pedestal in the center of the room. Something small and unassuming resting atop it. The artifact. The team approached cautiously, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on them like an overzealous aunt at a family reunion. It doesn't look like much, Terk said, peering at the object. Reminds me of my ex-wife's cooking. Be careful, Sierra warned, her fingers itching for closer inspection. We don't know what it does yet. Only one way to find out, Riven said, reaching for the artifact, his hand closing around it like he was claiming the last slice of cake at a party. The room seemed to hold its breath, the universe pausing in anticipation. Riven half expected something dramatic to happen, a flash of light, an explosion. Maybe a voice demanding identification. Instead, there was a disappointed whir, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Looks like we've got company, Terk said, backing up as figures poured through the open door, weapons gleaming like promises they intended to keep. Probably here for the same reason we are, Sierra said, pulling out her own weapon, an energy pistol that looked like it had seen better days. Riven pocketed the artifact, his eyes scanning the intruders. Time to make new friends. The leader of the newcomers, a woman with eyes colder than space, stepped forward. Malgar, isn't it? Guilty as charged, Riven said, his tone daring her to make a move. Hand over the artifact, she demanded. Her voice as sharp as the blade she brandished. Or what? Terk challenged, his bravado only slightly undermined by the sweat trickling down his forehead. Or we make you regret ever setting foot in this place, she replied, a wicked smile stretching across her face. Too late for that, Riven said, his own smile a mirror of her malice. The standoff crackled with tension, each side waiting for the other to blink. The promise of violence hung in the air like a noose, ready to tighten at the first misstep. Well, Riven said, breaking the silence with the air of someone about to order dessert, I guess we're doing this the hard way. And with that, chaos erupted, the kind that only seemed to happen when Riven and his crew were involved. Shots were fired, the sound reverberating off the walls like the world's worst symphony. Terk and Sierra took cover, returning fire with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for bar fights and tax season. Got any bright ideas? Terk shouted, ducking as a bolt of energy sizzled past his ear. Working on it, Riven replied, his mind racing through possibilities like a gambler on his last chip. He took aim, firing at the nearest foe, a satisfying grunt confirming his shot met its mark. Around him, the room became a tempest of motion, each member of his team dancing on the edge of disaster. Riven's gaze flicked to the artifact, nestled safely in his pocket, and he wondered, not for the first time, what the hell he'd gotten them into. The Ithara's weapon loomed over them all, a shadow threatening to snuff out the light of any resistance. Riven, Sierra's voice cut through the din, we can't hold them forever. Then let's make our exit memorable, he shouted, signaling to Terk. Time to blow this popsicle stand. Terk grinned, pulling a small detonator from his jacket. Always wanted to use this. With a flourish, he triggered the device, and the ceiling above them groaned, as if questioning its life choices. Dust rained down, chunks of debris following suit, crashing into the ground with enough force to shake the foundations. The intruders hesitated, eyes wide with disbelief as the room came down around them. Riven seized the moment, leading his team in a retreat that was more controlled chaos than strategic withdrawal. They dashed back through the corridors, the sounds of pursuit diminished in the wake of Terk's impromptu renovation. Each step was a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster and how far they had to go. "Let's hope Vax is in a good mood when we get back," Terk said, breathless as they reached the ladder. "If he isn't, we'll just tell him to get cozy with his plush toys," Riven replied, glancing at Sierra, who was already starting her climb. "You think the artifact's worth it?" Sierra asked, pausing to look back at him. "Only one way to find out," Riven said, gripping the ladder with determination, "and by the time we do, it might not matter." As they ascended, leaving the chaos of Bastion-12 behind, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were only just beginning. But then, that was the kind of luck they had, a knack for finding themselves at the center of the storm, and somehow, against all odds, coming out the other side. With any luck, they'd live to regret it, but for now, survival would have to do. As the dust settled from their latest escape, Riven found himself nursing a headache the size of Bastion-12 itself. He'd been in tighter spots before, sure, but there was something about this place that gnawed at him, a constant reminder that the universe was a comedian, and he was the butt of the joke. "You know," Terk said, his voice echoing off the grimy walls as they hustled through yet another dimly lit corridor, "it's a good thing I've got a lifetime supply of bad ideas." "Yeah. Well, I'm hoping your next one involves a way out of here alive," Riven shot back, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they weren't being followed. "No promises," Terk replied with a shrug, the plasma cutter still held like it was his only friend. Their escape had been a masterpiece of improvisation, if he did say so himself, but now came the hard part. Getting out before the Yathara turned the whole prison into their personal therapy session. And speaking of which, the metal passageways of Bastion-12 had always felt like the insides of a mechanical beast, dark, damp, and vaguely hostile. Now they pulsed with a new kind of menace, as if the air was charged with something invisible but undeniably sinister. "Anyone else feeling like they just walked into an awkward family reunion?" Sierra asked, her voice tinged with unease. "Worse," Riven replied, eyes scanning for threats. "More like the kind where everyone hates each other and someone's about to break out the karaoke machine." Their path led them deeper into the bowels of Bastion-12, each turn feeling like a gamble. But they weren't the only ones prowling these corridors. The Yathara had a way of getting under your skin, literally and figuratively. "They say the Yathara can make you cry and laugh at the same time," Terk mused, "like my ex with a bottle of cheap vodka." "Maybe they should weaponize your love life," Sierra quipped, fiddling with her gear as they moved. "Too deadly," Terk retorted, "even for them." Just then, a flicker in the darkness caught Riven's attention, a shadow moving with the eerie grace of something that had never known daylight. He held up a hand, signaling the others to halt. "Trouble incoming," he whispered. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in the distinctive armor of the Yathara, a mix of elegance and menace that seemed to taunt the very concept of peace. The envoy didn't carry a weapon, they didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to stir a swell of emotion so intense it was like standing at the edge of a cliff during a storm. "Greetings, humans," the envoy said, voice smooth as silk, each word tinged with the promise of subtle ruin. "I am Ambassador Jalin. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Riven fought to keep his emotions in check, the envoy's influence creeping into his mind like a thief in the night. "Sorry," Riven said, doing his best to sound unaffected. "We're fresh out of party favors." Jalin smiled, a gesture that seemed both genuine and chilling. "We're not here to fight. Our weapon is empathy, after all." "Good," Terk said, "because we left our emotions back at the entrance." "That's unfortunate," Jalin replied, eyes narrowing slightly, "but I'm sure we can find a way to resolve this without violence." "Listen, Ambassador," Riven said, trying to keep his voice steady, "we're just here for a relic. No one has to get hurt." "I wish it were that simple," Jalin replied, sounding almost regretful, "but the artifact you possess is integral to our cause. We cannot leave without it." "Sounds like a you problem," Terk interjected, earning him a sharp look from Riven. "Indeed," Jalin said, unfazed. "Here we are." As the envoy spoke, Riven felt an unsettling wave of calm wash over him, a gentle push to lower his guard, to yield. He knew it was the Yathara's doing, but knowing didn't make resisting any easier. "We've got to move," Sierra whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're sitting ducks out here." Riven nodded slightly, calculating their options. Negotiation wasn't his strong suit, but if they didn't find a way out soon, they'd be trapped in the Yathara's web. Willingly handing over the artifact and their sanity. "Tell you what," Riven said, trying to sound like he was holding all the cards. "Let us leave with our lives, and we'll forget we ever saw you." Jalin's smile widened, a predator's grin. "I'm afraid that's not how this story ends." "Well then," Riven said, stepping back slowly, "I guess we'll have to improvise." With that, he gave the signal, and they broke into a run, adrenaline fueling their flight as Jalen's voice echoed behind them, weaving through their minds like a melody they couldn't shake. "Do you honestly think you can escape?" Jalen called, the words sinking into Riven's thoughts, planting seeds of doubt. "Worth a shot," Terk yelled back, his bravado barely masking the tremor in his voice. They rounded a corner, heartbeats thundering in their ears, the oppressive architecture of the prison closing in around them. Riven knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The Yathara's reach was as insidious as it was intangible. "Got any more tricks up your sleeve?" Riven asked Sierra between breaths. "Just one," she replied, pulling out a small device from her pack. "But it's not exactly science." "Desperate times," Riven said, urging her to get on with it. Sierra fiddled with the device, her hands moving with the precision of someone who knew their life depended on it. The gadget emitted a low hum, gathering energy, a last-ditch attempt to scramble the Yathara's influence, if only for a moment. "Here goes nothing," she muttered, pressing a button. A pulse of energy radiated outwards, an invisible shield pushing against the oppressive tide of emotion. It was a small reprieve, like a breath of fresh air in a choking room. "Nice work," Riven said, feeling the mental fog lift slightly. "Don't thank me yet," Sierra warned. "It won't last long." They continued to run, the corridors a blur of metal and shadow, each step taking them further from the envoy's grasp. But Riven knew it was only a matter of time before they'd have to face the Yathara again. "Hey, Riven," Terk said as they ran. "Remember that time on Althura 9 with the flesh-eating bacteria?" "Yeah, what about it?" Riven replied, dodging a low-hanging conduit. "Just thinking," Terk said, compared to today. "That was basically a spa day." Riven chuckled despite himself. "You always know how to put things in perspective." Their laughter was short-lived, however, as they skidded to a halt at the entrance to a large chamber. It was filled with prisoners, their faces a mix of fear and confusion, the Yathara's influence turning the room into a cauldron of emotional chaos. "Looks like we found the party," Terk said, eyeing the crowd. The prisoners' eyes turned towards them, some showing relief, others suspicion, all under the grip of emotions not entirely their own. "We've got to get through," Riven said, scanning for a clear path. "But we can't let the Yathara use them against us." Easier said than done. Sierra noted, her gaze shifting between the prisoners and the way forward. Riven stepped forward, raising his voice to cut through the murmur of the crowd. "We're not here to fight, we're just passing through." The prisoners hesitated, a ripple of unease passing through them. The Yathara's influence was strong, but not unbreakable. Human willpower was a stubborn thing. "Listen to me," Riven continued, his tone firm. "We're trying to stop the Yathara from turning this place into a nightmare. Why should we trust you?" One prisoner shouted, their voice shaking with emotion. "Because," Terk interjected, "we're the only ones crazy enough to stand up to them." A laugh came from somewhere in the crowd, breaking the tension like a pinprick to a balloon. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sway the balance. "We don't have time for this," Sierra reminded them, urgency threading her words. "Right," Riven agreed. "If you want to help clear a path." The prisoners exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming among them. Slowly, they began to part, creating a narrow corridor for Riven and his team to pass through. "Thanks," Riven said, nodding to them as they moved forward. "We owe you one. Just don't forget us when this is over." The prisoner replied, their voice filled with a flicker of hope. Riven didn't have the heart to tell them that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, he pushed on, leading his team towards the exit. As they disappeared into the twisting corridors of Bastion-12 once more, the weight of the artifact in his pocket felt heavier than ever. It was a burden they'd risked everything to retrieve, but its importance was still a mystery wrapped in danger. "Any sign of pursuit?" Riven asked, glancing at Terk. "Not yet," Terk replied, though his tone suggested it wouldn't stay that way for long. "Then let's keep moving," Riven said, urgency driving his steps. "We've got to get this back to the ship." "And then what?" Sierra asked, matching his pace. "Then we figure out how to use it against the Yathara," Riven said grimly, "before they tear the galaxy apart with kindness." Their path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, each step taking them closer to a confrontation that could end in disaster. But for now, they had a mission, a purpose to drive them forward through the darkness. As they navigated the labyrinth of Bastion-12, Riven couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag group of relic hunters, standing against a force that wielded emotions like a scalpel, all for a chance to change the tide of a battle they never asked to fight. But then, as far as he was concerned, the universe had always been a cruel comedian, and they were just trying to survive the punchline. Riven Malgar's headache throbbed in time with his pulse as they pressed through the oppressive corridors of Bastion-12. The air thick with the kind of dredge you only find in the universe's least recommended tourist traps. "Keep your eyes peeled," he murmured, more out of habit than hope. "Last thing we need is a surprise party." "I could do without any surprise parties for the rest of my life," Terk grumbled, clutching his trusty plasma cutter like it was his childhood teddy bear. "Or any parties, or any surprises." Sierra shot them both a look that was equal parts exasperated and amused. "You two really know how to make a girl feel like she's on a grand adventure." Hey, my therapist says sarcasm is my love language, Riven replied, trying not to let the iron tang of fear fill his mouth. They rounded a corner, the dim lighting doing its best impression of a black hole. The narrow passageway opened into a cavernous chamber, where the artifact lay at the center like a prize in a particularly deadly funfair game. Only this game was being run by a gang that had clearly drank the Yathara Kool-Aid. Looks like the welcoming committee is here, Terk said, nodding toward the group of heavily armed individuals who had chosen the wrong side of a villainous space opera. Great, Riven muttered, because what we really needed today was a shootout. The guards were a motley crew, their eyes glassy with the Yathara's influence, like they'd been injected with a cocktail of empathy and madness. The leader, a burly fellow with arms like tree trunks and a face like a boulder, stepped forward. You're trespassing, he growled, managing to sound simultaneously bored and threatening, like a lion tired of zebras. Riven shrugged. We're more like uninvited guests. Just here to pick up a little something and be on our way. The leader didn't look impressed. That artifact isn't going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. Seems like a classic standoff, Terk said, twirling his plasma cutter in a way that said, I'm trying to look cool, but I might just drop this thing. Riven sighed, already tired of the banter. Listen, big guy, we just want the shiny thing in the middle there. You can keep the existential crisis. The leader didn't budge. And Riven's patience, which was never particularly robust, frayed further. The air seemed to hum with tension, a prelude to chaos. All right, folks, Riven said, shifting into high gear. Plan B. What's Plan B? Sierra asked, eyes scanning for exits or anything that wouldn't result in immediate death. Try not to die, Riven replied, pulling out his blaster and setting it to please don't jam now. The next few moments were a blur, a mix of blaster fire, shouted curses, and the sweet symphony of technological destruction. Riven ducked behind a console, the artifact gleaming tantalizingly in his peripheral vision. Cover me, he shouted, because that always seemed like the right thing to say in these situations. Terk, bless his reckless soul, popped up like a demented jack-in-the-box, laying down suppressive fire with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had to explain a plasma burn to their insurance provider. Sierra, meanwhile, moved with the grace of someone who didn't want to be shot today. Thank you very much. Her fingers danced over the device she'd been tinkering with earlier, trying to coax it into giving them an edge. Riven took a deep breath and broke cover, sprinting toward the artifact like his life depended on it, which, funnily enough, it did. The adrenaline coursed through him, sharpening his senses and numbing his common sense. Almost there, he yelled, ducking as a bolt of energy sizzled past his ear. Take your time, Terk called back, sarcasm dripping from his words like venom. We've got all day. Riven reached the artifact, a cube of intricate design, pulsing with an energy that made his skin tingle, and snatched it up, the weight of it far more significant than its size suggested. I've got it, he shouted, turning back to his team. Great, Sierra replied, her voice strained with concentration as she activated her device. Now get your ass back here. Riven didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted back, the artifact clutched tight, heart hammering in his chest like it wanted to break free and start a new life as a pacifist. The guards, now more annoyed than influenced, redoubled their efforts to make their point with high-velocity projectiles. The air crackled with energy, the smell of ozone sharp and unforgiving. Riven skidded to a halt next to Terk and Sierra, breathing hard. What's the plan now? Run like hell, Terk answered, clearly a man after Riven's own heart. With Sierra's device providing a temporary disruption to the guards' coordination, a feat of technological wizardry or sheer dumb luck, they made their escape, the artifact safely in Riven's grip. Remind me, Riven panted as they pounded down another corridor, why we do this again. Because we're too dumb to quit and too stubborn to die, Sierra said, her wry smile a beacon of audacity. They reached a junction, the path ahead splitting in two equally unappealing directions. Riven paused, trying to decide which way felt less like a trap. Left, Terk suggested, pointing with the hand not occupied by his beloved cutter. Sure, why not? Riven agreed, because decisions made under duress are always the best kind. They veered left, their footsteps echoing in the metal labyrinth. Riven's gut told him they were close, though his gut had been wrong before, particularly about that seafood stand on Althura 9. As they ran, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact in his hand was more than just ancient tech. It hummed with a potential that was both exhilarating and terrifying, like it held the key to their salvation or their end. We need to figure out what this thing does, Riven said, glancing at Sierra. She nodded, eyes focused ahead. Let's get back to the ship first. I don't fancy doing science experiments in a death trap. Riven could agree with that. They had a knack for finding themselves in tight spots, but even he had his limits. The ship was their best bet, a mobile fortress in a universe that seemed hell-bent on their demise. They burst out of the corridor into a garage-like expanse where their ship, a battered beauty with more patch jobs than a quilt, awaited. Riven practically felt the warmth of its engines before they'd even started up. Home sweet home, Terk exclaimed with the kind of relief reserved for finding an oasis in a desert. Don't get too comfortable, Sierra warned, her gaze sweeping the area for signs of pursuit. Riven dashed up the ramp. The artifact still tucked under his arm like a stolen football. He made a beeline for the cockpit, fingers flying over controls that responded with comforting familiarity. The ship hummed to life, a dependable beast ready for flight. Everyone strapped in. Riven called as he powered up the engines, the vibrations thrumming through the floor. Yeah, just get us out of here, Terk replied, sounding more like someone discussing dinner plans than imminent escape. Riven didn't need more encouragement. With a flick of switches and a prayer to whichever deity oversaw reckless pilots, they shot out of Bastion-12, the oppressive prison shrinking behind them. As stars stretched into lines outside the viewport, Riven let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were free, at least for now. So, Sierra said, leaning back in her seat, "What's the plan with that thing?" Riven held up the artifact, its surface glowing subtly. "We figure out how to use it against the Yathara. Before they decide to weaponize hugs again," Terk added, his grin as infectious as his optimism was sparse. Riven chuckled, despite everything. Their odds were astronomical, their allies few, and their path fraught with danger. But as the universe's most unlikely heroes, they'd make it work. They always did, if only because they were too stubborn to admit otherwise. Riven Malgar always thought the universe had a sense of humor, albeit a twisted one. Nothing reminded him of this more than the sight of Terk's plasma cutter frying itself. It wasn't exactly how he planned to start their day of high-stakes lunacy. "Wonderful," Riven grumbled, watching Terk examine the tool with the same forlorn expression a parent might have when faced with a rebellious teenager. "This is why we can't have nice things, Terk. Don't blame me," Terk shot back, cradling the sputtering tool. "Maybe if this piece of junk was made by something other than the lowest bidder, it wouldn't have betrayed us." Sierra rolled her eyes, her patience thinner than the ice on Althura 9 infamous flesh-eater pawns. "Can we focus on the fact that we're being hunted by a group of empathy-fueled lunatics? Just a suggestion." Riven shrugged. Can't we at least pretend like we're not the galaxy's most wanted for 5 minutes?" They'd barely managed to escape Bastion-12. Artifact in hand, when their ship had decided to rebel in the most spectacular fashion. Now they found themselves stranded in what could charitably be called a spaceport. In reality, it was more a scrapyard with delusions of grandeur. Sierra knelt by the artifact, her brow furrowed. The artifact sat there as enigmatic as ever, glowing with a promise of importance that none of them really understood. "This thing," she said, tapping it with her finger, "is causing us more trouble than it's worth." "That's assuming we'd be having an easy time without it," Riven replied, his sarcasm hitting as hard as a runaway asteroid. "I'm just glad we've got the local hospitality to look forward to." As if on cue, a group of guards appeared at the edge of the tarmac, their expressions as welcoming as a supernova. Their uniforms bore the insignia of Bastion-12, which, as far as Riven was concerned, meant the universe was once more proving its malicious sense of fun. "Hands up," the lead guard barked, his weapon trained on them. "You're under arrest for theft and trespassing." Riven raised his hands with a nonchalance born of repeated disappointment. "Great, added to the list of our many achievements. I was getting worried no one cared about us anymore." The guards closed in, and Riven felt a tingle of something less noble than fear crawl up his spine. It was bad enough being caught, but being caught by the Yathara-influenced maniacs, that was a new low. "You know," Terk whispered as they were cuffed and guided toward a waiting transport. "I'm starting to think we should have taken those vacation brochures more seriously." "Yeah, maybe a nice quiet resort," Riven replied, his voice dripping with irony. "One without the homicidal maniacs." The transport rattled along the path back to Bastion-12, each bump a reminder of just how little the galaxy cared about their comfort. Riven found himself sitting next to a guard whose gaze was a cocktail of curiosity and barely restrained madness, the usual Yathara blend. "Tell me," Riven said, attempting to engage his captor in what could generously be termed conversation, "does the Yathara package come with dental?" The guard blinked, his expression as blank as cosmic voids. "Shut up," he replied, succinctly summing up the general vibe of their situation. "Charming," Sierra muttered, her eyes fixed on the passing stars beyond the transport's small window. "I love it when they play hard to get." They were brought back to the familiar oppressive corridors of Bastion-12, the air as thick with dread as it had been when they first snuck in. The guards marched them into a holding cell that was as inviting as a tomb. Riven supposed that was the point. "Home sweet home," Riven said, taking in the sparse accommodations with a sweeping gesture. "Do you think room service is included?" Terk snorted, settling onto the uncomfortable bench with the resigned air of someone who'd been through worse. "Only if you count existential dread as a side dish." The door clanged shut, leaving the three of them in the dim, flickering light. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made promises of long-term discomfort. "Well," Sierra said, rubbing her arms for warmth, "this is lovely. Maybe we can redecorate." Riven leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of their predicament settle on him like a lead blanket. He was acutely aware of the artifact, now confiscated by their captors, and the clock ticking down on whatever plans the Yathara had in store for it. Then, from a corner shadowed by gloom darker than a bureaucrat's soul, a voice cut through the silence. "Looks like you folks could use a hand." Riven squinted, trying to make out the figure that emerged from the shadows like a specter. The man was tall, lean, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His eyes glinted with an intelligence that was as sharp as a knife and just as dangerous. "And you are?" Riven asked, his interest piqued despite himself. "The name's Jax," the man replied, his grin as sharp as his eyes. "I've been here longer than I care to admit, but I've got a knack for getting out of tight spots." "Great," Terk said, his voice laced with skepticism. "Another optimist, just what we need." Jax chuckled, evidently unfazed by the sarcasm. "Oh, I'm no optimist, just someone who's tired of this particular brand of hospitality." "What's your game, Jax?" Sierra asked, casting him a wary glance. "Why help us?" Jax's gaze lingered on the door, as if considering the weight of his next words. "Let's just say I've got a vested interest in seeing the Yathara take a fall. And from what I hear, you might just have the key to doing that." Riven exchanged a look with Sierra and Terk, the silent communication of shared desperation. They were out of options, and this Jax character, though likely as trustworthy as a used hovercar salesman, was offering a sliver of hope. "Well," Riven said, forcing a smile that was more grimace than cheer, "welcome aboard. Let's hope your plan doesn't involve us ending up deader than disco." Jax nodded, his expression conspiratorially confident. "Don't worry. As plans go, this one's a masterpiece of improvisation." "Improv, huh?" Terk said, his voice dry as desert sand. "We're doomed." "Not quite yet." Jax smirked, tilting his head toward the ceiling. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." The lights flickered again, and a low hum began to resonate through the walls. Riven frowned, recognizing the sound of the facility systems coming online, a prelude to chaos if he'd ever heard one. "What's happening?" Sierra asked, her voice tense. Jax tapped his temple, his expression smug. "A little surprise I've been working on. It's about to get real lively in here." As if on cue, alarms blared, their shrill cry echoing through the corridors like a banshee's wail. Riven couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement cut through his anxiety. Chaos was his element, after all. "Time to move," Jax said, gesturing for them to follow. "We've got a ship to catch." Together they poured out of the cell, joining the throng of prisoners who'd suddenly found themselves free. The air was electric with the energy of the breakout, each person moving with the kind of manic determination only desperation could fuel. Riven stuck close to Terk and Sierra as they navigated the hallways, their path lit by the flashing red of the emergency lights. The sounds of guards trying and failing to regain control were music to his ears. "This way," Jax called, leading them through a tight corridor that seemed to twist and turn back on itself. Every step was a gamble, every corner a chance for disaster. But Jax seemed to know where he was going, and Riven had little choice but to trust him. It wasn't exactly his first choice, but desperate times and all that. They reached a junction, the way ahead blocked by a group of guards whose loyalty to the Yathara was unwavering, even in the face of chaos. Riven felt the old, familiar tension coil in his gut, the prelude to yet another standoff. "Here we go again," Terk muttered, brandishing his now-repaired plasma cutter with renewed determination. Jax glanced at Riven, his expression unreadable. "You've got the skills to handle this, right?" "We've got this," Riven replied, though his voice held more bravado than certainty. "Just keep moving, we'll follow." Sierra nodded, her gaze locked on the guards ahead. "On your lead, Riven." It was a mad dash, a dance of chaos and conflict as they pushed forward. Riven could feel the pressure building, the need to get out to survive. The guards were relentless, but desperation lent strength to their every move. Blaster fire cut through the air, the sharp scent of ozone mingling with the acrid tang of fear. Riven moved with the grace of someone used to the dance, Terk and Sierra at his side, Jax a step ahead. The artifact, now recovered in the chaos, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a beacon of uncertainty amidst the melee. Riven clutched it close, unwilling to let it go. "We can't keep this up forever," Terk shouted, the strain of their situation bleeding into his voice. "We won't have to," Jax replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "Just a little further." Riven didn't know whether to believe him, but the alternative wasn't an option. He pushed on, each step a defiance of the odds stacked against them. And then, just as it seemed they were about to be overwhelmed, they broke through into a hangar bay. The sight of their battered ship brought a surge of hope, a reminder of freedom just within reach. "Go, go," Jax urged, ushering them toward the ship. Riven didn't need more encouragement. They sprinted toward their vessel, the ramp lowering to meet them like a tongue welcoming them home. They piled inside, breathless, hearts pounding with adrenaline and the thrill of survival. "Get us out of here, Riven," Sierra called, collapsing into a seat with the kind of relief only narrowly avoided death could bring. Riven didn't hesitate. The engines roared to life, and they shot out of the hangar, leaving Bastion-12 behind. The stars stretched into lines, a promise of new beginnings wrapped in the infinite expanse of space. As they settled into the relative safety of their ship, Riven glanced at Jax, who stood with arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Nice to have you on board," Riven said, the words holding both gratitude and a hint of suspicion. Jax inclined his head, his grin broad, just glad to finally be moving in the right direction. with Bastion-12 a distant memory. Riven felt the weight of their journey ahead. The Yathara were still out there, still a threat. But with the artifact and their new ally, maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. And in a universe with a sense of humor, that was more than they could have hoped for. The artifact hummed quietly in Riven's grip, an unassuming piece of metal that looked about as threatening as a child's science fair project. Yet here they were, Galaxy's Most Wanted, with this cosmic trinket as their golden ticket or their death warrant. Only time would tell, and time, predictably, was being a real jerk about the whole thing. "So this is it?" Riven asked, his voice tinged with skepticism and perhaps a touch of hope. "This little doohickey is gonna save the galaxy." Jack shrugged, leaning back against the ship's hull with the casual air of someone who regularly strolled out of maximum security prisons. "That's the plan, more or less. We're going to make the Yathara wish they'd stuck to knitting scarves. Given the Yathara's temperament, I'm guessing their scarves would strangle you while whispering your childhood traumas," Terk added, tinkering with his plasma cutter as if it were a temperamental pet. Riven chuckled, albeit with that edge of gallows humor that flavored all their conversations these days. "If we're betting on this artifact, we better hope it's got more than just good vibes. What's the plan, Jax? You've been playing this close to the chest. We need to rally the prisoners," Jax said, his eyes scanning the ship's crew compartment. "Use the chaos, the madness the Yathara thrive on against them. And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Sierra asked, arms crossed, her posture a study in impatience. "Simple," Jax replied with a grin sharp enough to cut glass. "We give them a reason to believe, hope. Make them think they're not just pawns in the Yathara's twisted game." "Hope?" Riven raised an eyebrow, his expression dubious. "You got any of that lying around, because I seem to have misplaced mine." The ship shuddered slightly as it broke through into the vast nothingness of space, the stars outside like pinpricks in the dark. Riven felt a familiar tension coil in his gut, the kind that came from years of everything always going wrong at the worst possible time. "Hope's not something you find," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's something you make, and with this artifact we're going to rewrite the rules." Sierra snorted, the sound halfway between amusement and derision. "Great, so we're armchair revolutionaries now. Do we get matching t-shirts?" "Only if we live long enough to bedazzle them," Riven replied. He looked at Jax with a seriousness that surprised even him. "All right, we're in. What's next?" Jax pushed away from the hull, his demeanor shifting from relaxed to commanding with a speed that was almost unsettling. "We head back to Bastion-12, rally the prisoners, use the chaos to get close enough to the Yathara's command center. Then we let this little gizmo do its magic." "Magic?" Terk raised an eyebrow. "You're banking this whole thing on hoping this lump of metal does something." "Not just something," Jax corrected, his tone annoyingly confident. "Everything?" The ship's engines hummed a steady rhythm beneath them, a comforting reminder of the escape they'd just pulled off. Now they were headed back into the fray, a decision that seemed as smart as a sand dune in a rainstorm. Riven settled into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls with a practiced ease. Behind him, Sierra and Terk strapped in while Jax leaned against the wall, arms crossed, an inscrutable look on his face. "Let's hope this plan of yours isn't a one-way ticket to oblivion," Riven muttered, eyes fixed on the viewscreen as Bastion-12 loomed into view. "It's not the destination that matters," Jax said, his voice carrying a hint of mischief. "It's the friends we make along the way." "I'm not sure that applies when those friends are trying to kill you," Sierra pointed out dryly. "Details, details," Jax replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. As they approached the familiar, oppressive mass of Bastion-12, Riven couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia, the kind you usually reserved for root canals or tax audits. This place was a hellhole, sure, but it was their hellhole, and they were about to turn it inside out. The ship slipped into Bastion-12 docking bay with all the grace of a drunk bumblebee, the landing gear hitting the deck with a clang that echoed through the hull. Riven cut the engines, the sudden silence in the ship's interior almost deafening. "All right, folks," Riven said, rising from his seat. "Time to see if this plan's got legs." Sierra and Terk followed him to the hatch, their expressions a mix of determination and the kind of resignation that came from repeated exposure to near-death experiences. Jax brought up the rear, still wearing that damned smirk. The hatch opened with a hiss, the cold air of Bastion-12 rushing in like a wave of stale regrets. The corridor beyond was as dimly lit and foreboding as ever. A perfect stage for the chaos they were about to unleash. "Let's get this party started," Terk said, hefting his plasma cutter like it was an extension of his arm. Jax led the way, his steps confident, purposeful. Riven followed, the artifact clutched tightly in his grip. It felt warm, almost alive, a reminder of the stakes they were playing for. As they moved through the corridors, the sounds of the prison's chaos reached them, a cacophony of shouts, alarms, and the occasional explosion. It was music to Riven's ears, a symphony of freedom. Jack stopped at a junction, glancing back at the others. "Time to make some noise. We need to get their attention, rally the prisoners." "Shouldn't be too hard," Sierra commented, eyes scanning the corridor. "Everyone loves a good riot, especially when there's a chance to stick it to the Yathara." Riven added, the corner of his mouth twitching up in a grin. Terk took point, leading them into the main prisoner quarters, where the bulk of the inmates were housed. The area was already a riot of activity, guards shouting, prisoners shouting louder, and in the midst of it all, a sense of purpose beginning to stir. "Listen up," Jax shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a well-aimed blaster bolt. "The Yathara think they've won. They think they've got us beat. But we've got something they don't. We've got the will to fight." There was a murmur of agreement, a ripple of excitement that spread through the crowd like a fire catching dry tinder. Riven stepped forward, the artifact held aloft. "This here is the key to turning the tables. Together, we can take back what's ours. Together, we can show the Yathara they picked the wrong lot to mess with." The response was a chorus of cheers, a rallying cry that filled the air with a palpable energy. Riven felt a thrill of possibility, a rare moment of optimism in a universe that seemed hell-bent on ruining his day. "All right, let's move out," Jax commanded, and with that they surged forward as one, a wave of defiance crashing against the Yathara's control. The corridors became a battlefield, a chaotic dance of blaster fire and fists, the prisoners fighting with a desperation born of years in captivity. Riven, Sierra, and Terk led the charge, the artifact a beacon of their resolve. As they pushed deeper into the heart of Bastion-12, the Yathara's forces began to falter, their empathy-fueled madness no match for the raw determination of those seeking freedom. Each step forward was a blow against the oppressive regime, each victory a testament to their collective strength. Riven found himself shoulder to shoulder with Jax as they rounded a corner, the command center just ahead. It was heavily guarded, a final line of defense between them and the Yathara's leadership. "Ready?" Jax asked, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Always," Riven replied, the artifact pulsing in his hand, a promise of what was to come. They charged, the prisoners rallying behind them, and as they breached the command center's defenses, Riven knew they were on the brink of something monumental. Jax reached over, giving Riven a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Let's show these bastards what a little hope can do." And with that, they plunged into the fray, ready to rewrite the rules in a universe that had never played fair. Riven Malgar stepped into Bastion-12 Command Center, the artifact humming ominously in his hand. This little hunk of metal was their ticket to either glory or the afterlife, and given their track record, Riven wasn't holding his breath for glory. The place was a mess that reeked of desperation and last-minute plans. Monitors blinked with frantic data, guards barked orders with the confidence of cats trying to herd raccoons. And the atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that only comes from knowing you're about to throw a wrench into a blender. "All right, everyone," Riven muttered. "Time to make some noise, but not too much. We're not trying to bring the whole damn place down." Sierra shot him an unimpressed look. "Could have fooled me." Riven joined Jax at the center console, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. "You sure this thing works?" he asked, nodding toward the artifact. "Sure as a bet on a one-legged horse," Jax replied, his grin unfaltering. "All we need to do is plug it in and let it do its thing." "Sounds easy enough," Terk chimed in, his plasma cutter sparking in his hands, which, given our luck, means it's about to get real difficult. "Then let's not waste time," Jax said, motioning towards a panel on the wall. "Riven, you're up." Taking a deep breath, Riven approached the panel, hoping to hell this wasn't about to blow them all to smithereens. He slotted the artifact into a port that looked suspiciously like it had been made for a completely different kind of tech, and waited, and waited. "Anytime now," Sierra urged, her eyes flicking nervously to the doorway, "before someone decides to greet us with a blaster." Suddenly, the artifact lit up, casting an eerie glow that rippled through the room like a predatory fish swimming through murky waters. Data streams on the monitors went haywire, codes unraveling and reforming into patterns Riven couldn't make heads or tails of. And then, just like that, it started. The artifact pulsed, sending out waves of energy that crackled through the air. Riven felt a tingling sensation, like static electricity, prickling his skin. The guards, previously ready to pounce, froze, their aggressive postures slackening. It was as if the artifact had flipped a switch in their brains, turning the empathy weapon back on its creators. "Holy hell," Terk whispered, watching with wide eyes. "It's actually working." "Don't sound so surprised," Riven shot back, even as relief flooded through him. "I told you we had a shot." "Yeah, but I figured that shot was a half-empty bottle of whiskey," Terk retorted, a rare smile playing on his lips. As the artifact's influence spread, the chaos in Bastion-12 seemed to amplify and then settle into a new order. The prisoners, once pawns in the Yathara's grand game, were reclaiming their minds, their sense of self. They looked around, blinking as if waking from a long, disorienting dream. Jax seized the moment, his voice booming over the confusion. "You all feel that? That's freedom, folks, knocking on our door. Time to answer it." The prisoners responded with roars of agreement, the kind of primal noise that preceded revolutions and pub fights. It was the sound of people who'd been pushed too far, who were ready to take back their lives with both hands and maybe a boot to the ass for good measure. "We've got the upper hand," Sierra said, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that was both inspiring and a bit terrifying. "Let's not waste it." "Agreed," Riven nodded, feeling the energy of the room energize him. "Jax, what's the next move?" Spread the word, Jax replied, gesturing to the communications console. Let's get the rest of the prisoners on board and turn this place inside out. With a few quick commands, Riven activated Bastion-12 intercom system, broadcasting throughout the facility. This is Riven Malgar. We've turned the Ithara's own weapon against them. Anyone within the sound of my voice, you're free. Now's the time to fight back and reclaim your future. The response was almost immediate, the sounds of renewed brawls and shouts of defiance echoing through the corridors. Riven couldn't help but feel a surge of hope, a rare commodity in his line of work. Looks like we've got ourselves a movement, Terk said, his expression one of grudging admiration. Yeah, well, movements have a way of getting squashed, Sierra pointed out, ever the realist. Let's make sure this one doesn't. The artifact continued to hum, its work not yet done. Riven could feel its power, a tangible force that seemed to pulse with purpose. The Ithara's hold was slipping, their influence unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater in a dog park. The prisoners were gaining the upper hand, pushing the Ithara forces back step by step. Let's move, Jax ordered, leading the charge out of the command center. We take this fight to them where it hurts. The halls of Bastion-12 were a madhouse, a chaotic mix of combat and conflict, with prisoners and guards battling it out in every corner. The Ithara, stripped of their edge, were falling back, their forces crumbling as the tide turned against them. Riven stayed close to Jax, the artifact still in his grasp. It guided them, a beacon of rebellion, drawing them deeper into enemy territory. Sierra and Terk flanked them, their expressions set and determined, ready to face whatever came next. They fought through waves of resistance, every step forward a testament to their sheer willpower. Riven's mind raced with the possibilities, the potential to finally end the Ithara's stranglehold. It was a chance they couldn't afford to miss. As they neared the heart of the facility, the Ithara made their last stand, a desperate, chaotic defense with barely a semblance of order. Their empathy-fueled madness had turned on them, and it was all they could do to hold the line. Let's finish this, Jax declared, his voice carrying over the din of battle. No more running, no more hiding. We end this now. The final push was brutal, a storm of blaster fire and close-quarters combat that left no room for hesitation. Riven, Jax, Sierra, and Terk fought with everything they had, drawing on reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. It was a fight as messy as any bar brawl, and twice as deadly. With each Ithara soldier that fell, the prisoners surged forward, driven by a thirst for freedom that couldn't be quenched. Riven felt the artifact pulsing in his grip, its energy feeding into the chaos, disrupting the Ithara's tactics and seeding confusion in their ranks. And then, finally, they broke through. The last line of defense crumbled, the Ithara routed, their forces scattered and defeated. It was over, the battle won, the prisoners victorious. Riven stood in the aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been the Ithara's stronghold. He felt a strange mixture of triumph and weariness, the kind of tired satisfaction that comes with knowing you've pulled off the impossible. Holy shit, Terk breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. Did we actually just win? Looks that way, Sierra said, a rare smile tugging at her lips. Guess we're not dead after all. Jax clapped a hand on Riven's shoulder, his grin as wide and infuriating as ever. I told you hope was something you make. Yeah, well, I'll stick to making plasma cutters, Riven replied, though he couldn't hide the relief in his voice. As the prisoners began to celebrate, their cheers echoing through the halls, Riven felt something shift within him. Maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't entirely out to get him. All right, people, Jax called out, gathering the attention of the newly liberated. We did it. We took back Bastion-12, but this is just the start. We've got a whole galaxy out there that needs saving, so let's get to it. Riven watched as the prisoners rallied around Jax, a strange, motley crew of hardened survivors and fresh-faced recruits. It was a sight he never thought he'd see, and one he wasn't sure he deserved. So, what now? Sierra asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon of possibilities. Where do we go from here? Wherever we damn well please, Riven replied, a crooked grin on his face. The universe is open, and I've got a feeling we're just getting started. With the Ithara routed and the prisoners freed, Riven felt a sense of closure, a rare moment of peace in a life that had known too little of it. They had done the impossible, and though the future was uncertain, he knew they had the strength to face it. Let's get back to the ship, he said, gesturing to the others. We've got a galaxy to save, and I hear it's not going to save itself. As they made their way through the wreckage of Bastion-12, Riven felt something akin to hope, a cautious, fragile thing, but real nonetheless. It was a new beginning, a chance to rewrite their story, and for once he was ready to see where it led. And so, with the artifact in hand and the universe stretching out before them, Riven Malgar and his motley crew embarked on their next adventure, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Hope, he muttered to himself, unable to suppress a wry smile. Who knew it'd be so damn contagious? Riven Malgar looked around the battered command center of Bastion-12, now more of a war-torn victory lap than anything resembling a command post. The screens flickered like they were having a seizure, possibly catching the same enthusiasm as the liberated prisoners. It felt strange to stand in the middle of something that had once been a hive of oppression, now turned into the universe's most disorganized victory party. Well, Riven said, leaning against a console that looked like it might give out any second. Never thought I'd live to see Bastion-12, the new symbol of Stick It to the Man. Terk, his plasma cutter still comfortably cradled like a beloved and slightly lethal child, nodded. Probably worth more as a tourist attraction now. Come see the infamous Galactic Armpit where the Yathara learned not to mess with us. Charge admission and we're set. Sierra snorted. As if anyone would willingly come here. Place smells like the ass end of a black hole. Jax, the eternal optimist in a trench coat of cynicism, sauntered over with a grin that could melt steel. We've got a chance to make something here. Turn this death trap into a beacon for others. Beacon? Riven raised an eyebrow. I thought we agreed to avoid cliches. All right, maybe a lighthouse for the terminally screwed, Jax conceded. Point is, we did something big here. Feels like we should keep doing it. The artifact, still humming in Riven's hand, felt warm like a smug cat that had just brought in a dead mouse and expected praise. It had been their ticket to flipping the tables, and it had done its job well. But the weight of it was a constant reminder. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. So we just stick around and play the hero? Riven asked, trying not to sound too much like he was protesting. Last I checked, the galaxy's still a dumpster fire. And we're the match, Terk quipped. Guess it's time we learn to play with fire. Riven sighed. Fine. But if we're doing this, we're gonna need more than a hunk of metal and the goodwill of a bunch of ex-prisoners. Jax nodded. We've got momentum. Just need to keep it rolling. And maybe get the ship to stop rebelling against us. Let's not pretend the ship isn't a diva, Sierra added, crossing her arms. What I'd give for a vessel that doesn't have an existential crisis every time we hit a warp gate. Riven chuckled despite himself. If it wasn't for its tendency to throw tantrums, we wouldn't be here. So credit where it's due. Great, Terk said dryly. We're led by a piece of tech with the emotional stability of a caffeinated squirrel. The banter was interrupted by a group of prisoners. No, allies now, streaming into the command center. Faces once hollow with despair now lit with something dangerously close to hope. They looked at Riven with a mix of gratitude and expectation, like he was some kind of reluctant messiah. Guess they're waiting for a speech, Sierra nudged him. Riven groaned internally. If there was one thing he hated more than speeches, it was being the center of attention during one. All right, let's get this over with. He stepped forward and the room quieted. The kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Riven cleared his throat, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. Listen up, everyone, he began, trying to keep it casual, like he was addressing a rowdy bar crowd. We did something huge today. We took Bastion-12 and made it ours. It's no small feat, and everyone here should be damn proud. There were murmurs of agreement, a few cheers. It helped loosen the knot in his stomach. But he continued, this is just the start. The Yathara are still out there, still doing their thing, and they're not going to be happy about this little stunt we've pulled. A few nervous laughs. Good. They needed to be aware of the danger, but not paralyzed by it. So what do we do? Riven asked, more rhetorical than anything. We keep fighting, we keep pushing back. We take this momentum and shove it right up the Yathara's collective backside. That got a cheer, louder this time. He could see it in their eyes, the spark of rebellion, the thrill of having something worth fighting for again. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. We'll need to rebuild, Jax chimed in, stepping up beside Riven. Strengthen our defenses. Reach out to others who might want to join the cause. This is the start of something bigger. Yeah, Riven added, feeling a strange kind of camaraderie spreading through the room. And if any of you know how to keep a ship from having a breakdown, let me know. We could use the help. Laughter mixed with the applause, and Riven felt a flicker of hope, an ember in the dark. Fragile but real, it was enough to make him think they might just have a fighting chance. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with plans and possibilities, Riven turned to his crew, his friends, his fellow crazies in this mad venture. So, what's next? Terk asked, a sparkle in his usually skeptical eyes. Next, Riven said, his tone lighter than it had been for a long time. We get some rest, and then we figure out how the hell to save the galaxy. You make it sound easy, Sierra teased. Who knows? Riven shrugged. Maybe it will be. Not likely, Jax said, clapping him on the back. But that's never stopped us before. As they made their way through the now-echoing halls of Bastion-12, Riven couldn't help but feel a strange sense of belonging. They'd faced the odds, stared down the impossible, and come out the other side, maybe a little worse for wear, but alive. And as they walked, they knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. In the end, it didn't matter if the universe had a sense of humor or if fate had dealt them a raw hand. They had each other, a ragtag crew with more guts than sense, ready to take on the galaxy's worst and then some. And if that wasn't the start of something great, Riven didn't know what was. 3 days later, Bastion-12 was starting to resemble less of a chaotic war zone and more of a dysfunctional community center. Sort of like if a prison and a home renovation show had a very messy child. Riven marveled at how quickly everyone had settled into their new roles. It was like watching a particularly enthusiastic colony of very loud ants. In the makeshift command hub, which was really just a less broken part of the facility with fewer sparks and exposed wires, Terk was tinkering with a panel. He'd adopted the role of chief engineer by virtue of being the only one who could fix things without immediately breaking them again. Sierra was doing inventory, which was essentially her poking through what they had and making sarcastic comments about how screwed they were in terms of supplies. Typical Sierra, pragmatic to the point of pessimism. As for Jax, he had taken to organizing the defense teams, which was a polite way of saying he was trying to stop people from killing each other while they waited for something to fight. It was a job that required patience, diplomacy, and the occasional threat of bodily harm. Riven found himself with a rare moment of downtime, wandering the corridors and checking in with the various groups. It was strange how quickly he'd become a leader in all this, like he'd fallen into the role by accident and now couldn't quite find the exit. He stopped at a viewport, looking out at the stars, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel something close to peace. They'd done the impossible, and that was worth savoring, even if just for a moment. Staring into the void again, Sierra's voice broke into his thoughts, and he turned to see her leaning against the wall, arms crossed. A small smirk on her lips. "Thought I'd try and make friends with the cosmos," Riven replied, grinning back. "Turns out it's just as chatty as ever." Sierra rolled her eyes. "Well, when you're done bonding with the universe, there's a meeting you might want to attend." Riven sighed, but he wasn't really annoyed. Meetings were part of the deal now, like unpaid therapy sessions with fewer biscuits. "All right, lead the way." They joined the others in what had once been the warden's office, now repurposed as a conference room of sorts. The Daker still screamed dictatorship, but at least the oppressive vibes were gone. Jax was already there, going over reports with Terk. They looked up as Riven and Sierra entered. "Glad you could join us, O fearless leader," Jax said, his tone mocking but with a hint of affection. Yeah, Riven waved him off, taking a seat. "What's the news?" Terk flipped a page on his datapad, which was mostly charred but still functional. "We've got enough supplies to last us a few weeks, maybe a month if we ration. And the defenses are coming along, though we'd be better off if we had more weapons. Or, a massive fleet of warships," Sierra added dryly. "One step at a time," Jax said. "We've got a few contacts out there, people who might be willing to help us if we can reach them." Riven nodded, feeling the familiar tug of duty settling over him. "All right, let's focus on making those connections. The more allies we have, the better chance we stand against the Yathara." "Piece of cake," Terk said, though his expression suggested he'd rather eat a live scorpion. "And the artifact?" Sierra asked, glancing at the metal that had quite literally changed their lives. "Still humming along," Riven said, patting it like it was a pet lapdog. "I get the feeling it's not done with us yet." "Good," Jax said. "We're going to need every advantage we can get." Riven looked around at his friends, his crew. Each of them had their scars, their past they couldn't quite shake off. But beneath it all, there was a shared determination, a resolve that had carried them this far and would, he hoped, carry them further still. "So," he said, allowing himself a rare smile, "who's ready to save the galaxy?" The responses were a mix of groans and chuckles, but the spirit was there, alive and kicking. They were in for the long haul, come what may. As they got up to continue their work, Riven felt a strange, inexplicable warmth. It was a dangerous thing, this hope, but maybe it was what they needed. Maybe it was what they'd all been missing. And as they moved forward into the unknown, Riven couldn't help but think that whatever lay ahead, they were ready for it. Bring it on, universe. They were just getting started.